thank you again for joining us this afternoon to hear a bit about our project and what we've been doing over the last couple of years with regards to thinking about next generation services and what collaborative design can bring to this, we hope. Next slide, please. So as Richard said, this is the first session. I've got colleagues from across the project that I'll be handing the baton on to. It is a multi-partner project funded by Innovate UK, UKRI under the industrial strategy. And our project very much has been looking at some of the non-technical aspects of the future of next generation services firms and what that means and how we can support firms on that journey, and particularly with regards to AI readiness. But what we'll be talking to you about this afternoon in the first session is some of the methods and the tools that we've got in place to be able to support firms with that journey, and that we've been engaged with many firms on over the past 2 years. So just very briefly, I wanted to give a headline overview to those of you that are not familiar with the project, what it's about. It is essentially about AI readiness. And there's been 3 aspects to the project. We've been focusing on mid-tier firms. As part of that, we, as an academic team working with the Managing Partners Forum and also Norman Partners, we've been trying to develop new insights about the use of AI and machine learning in particular within professional services firms with a keen focus on legal and accounting, but then trying to think about what that means in practice and then how we can use those insights to support other mid-tier and smaller firms on that journey, taking lessons from those that are perhaps the early adopters and how we can then support those in implementing some of those new technologies where it's appropriate. In doing this and undertaking this, the 2 other aspects of the project. So you'll hear from Bruce Tether shortly, who will be talking about some of the futures, the scenarios that we've built to try and challenge firms with regards to some of their planning, thinking about how they may need to adapt and how their relationships with clients might need to adapt given the use of some of these technologies. And also we're going to hear from Lucy Kimbell, who's going to talk a bit about the design sprints and how we've developed this methodology working with firms to try and understand how we can support them on that journey. Next slide, please. So the project has a series of reports. The second report there is one we're going to hear a bit about this afternoon from 2 of my colleagues based at Lancaster University, James Faulconbridge and Martin Spring. And again, these reports are available and will be available following the presentations today on the website for the project. And again, we'll share details of that throughout the afternoon and put them in the chat. But what I hope is that these reports are written in a way that is essentially accessible. It's trying to convey our insights and what we understand about the professions and what we understand about the best ways to think about the adoption of some of these technologies and the methods that we've used in supporting firms in actually going about that. So Richard affectionately refers to this as the gift that the project brings to the professions. And what we've been working on has culminated in what we've called this kind of AI readiness toolkit. Now, the toolkit, as the subtitle suggests, is about collaborative design. It's using the design thinking lenses, using the scenarios coupled with the research insights from the project to really have a very kind of engaged format to enable firms both to help themselves by using some of the tools and the methods that are freely available as a result of the project through the project website, but also on Richard's HighQ variant available through the Managing Partners Forum. But also what we're trying to do is to continue to see how we can support the sector, support firms by undertaking facilitated workshops, both of a design sprint thinking about AI readiness, but also some of the strategic challenges that exist very much around the adoption of AI and what that means in these different future scenarios that we've created. So at this point, I'm going to hand on to the next speaker, who is Lucy Kimbell, who's going to talk a little bit more about the nature of design and what we've tried to do through the project with regards to AI readiness and collaborative design. Thank you.
So I'm going to briefly give you a little bit of a background into design and why and how we've adapted some of the core principles into the specific context of AI in professional services firms. And we, from the outset, the design of the project, we wanted to learn from design or design thinking, which is being recognized as a an innovation capability used now very widely in business and in the public sector. So the characteristics of design that we wanted to draw on is to think about how people experience and interact with services, here professional services, using the methodologies of design which emphasize visualizations and mock-ups to allow people to explore and share ideas, generating multiple solutions, exploring those solutions and reviewing them through something that design calls prototyping, involving different people from across the business in co-design and embracing uncertainty. So those were the characteristics of design that we built into the project and adapted other forms of design thinking to the specific case of exploring AI readiness in firms. So here's some of the things that were achieved through using this methodology. And the pictures you see here, some of them are, for example, the one on the left-hand side is a photo from one of our workshops, and the image on the right-hand side is a screen grab from one of our online events that we adapted to as the pandemic took its course. So one of the things this methodology achieves is to help the participants stimulate new thinking about what the future business might look like. Another thing that is results from using this methodology is enabling meaningful collaboration with different perspectives from across the business, including fee earners, including different business functions. And if, for example, on the right-hand side, you see one of the outputs, which is obviously from a paper that's from one of our face-to-face sprints, which is a framework for helping the participants think through the implications of some of the changes that might result from AI. And then when we were doing face-to-face sprints, but again adapted for online delivery, we were using this simple techniques over not very long, 20 minutes or so, to engage people to think about making what might a future firm look like, and using these sort of throwaway cheap materials and on provoking some levels of discomfort sometimes among professionals, but also an openness, because everybody can play with materials. There's no particular expertise required. And that enabled opening up discussions and equalizing some of the conversations around the table. And then here is an example of thinking about what the future AI-enabled client experience might look like. So on the left-hand side, again, that's produced by a team who are working in our face-to-face sprints, creating a storyboard of the future client experience. And then on the right-hand side, a digital version when we adapted this for online. And then finally, having generated these ideas, explored them, what the future firm might look like, what the future client experience might look like, the important thing was to make those insights and those ideas actionable for the participants to build on. And so there was a number of methods to help participants explore what the implications were in terms of change. And throughout that journey, which you've seen there in these few pictures, we were integrating the insights from the case studies that my colleagues are going to talk about in a moment, and also insights around business models and business model innovation, as well as the set of future scenarios that we developed for the project. I'm now going to hand over to Bruce Tether, who's going to talk to you a bit more about the scenarios.
Hello from a very sunny Manchester. So yes, my pleasure to talk to you about the scenarios which we developed. So one thing is that people find very difficult is to think about the future and how the future might be different from the present. I mean, if we think about universities, for example, we can't think about different ways to teach, apart from the lecture and seminar approach that we've used for hundreds of years. But so what we wanted to do was try to provoke people into thinking about how the future might be different from the present. And so initially through desk research, and thinking about the future and what futures AI might bring about, but also interviewing people, etc., we started to develop these scenarios about possible different futures. So this isn't a process of trying to forecast in the sense of take today and push forward. It's trying to think about foresighting, which is alternative futures. So we really want to emphasize that we didn't try to make predictions. We wanted to think about alternative possibilities, what might be, and also to provoke our participants in the sense of trying to take them out of their comfort zones. So rather than say, well, this future is going to be just the same as the present, we tried to sort of challenge them about thinking how the future might be different. And to this extent, we also used scenarios as what we call boundary object. Boundary objects were also used in the design sprints, which Lucy outlined just now. A boundary object is an object through which people can have conversations. So we developed three contrasting scenarios. So typically in scenario development, you develop a small number, 3 or 4, partly because people tend to be able to cope with that. We discussed these also in breakout sessions. So with companies, we would do one and then the next one and then the next one. So you can only do so many. But these are 3 contrasting scenarios. This first one is a world in which platform businesses dominate. So we think about the social network businesses of today, they really dominate social networks. So things like Facebook and Twitter, etc. But they've come to dominate the world of AI, and they control access to data, and they make it. And being big is a very powerful position in this future scenario. And therefore, for our smaller, mid-sized companies, it's quite an intimidating, difficult place to be. But that's one of our scenarios, very briefly. The second one is a different one, because this was one in which there's a huge amount of surveillance-based technologies. And so AI has been developed, and what we've got is a very sort of Big Brother type world in which there's a huge amount of surveillance going on, huge amount of monitoring. This is kind of interesting because it creates not lots of opportunities. It creates, for example, opportunities for providing services around surveillance. So rather than being perhaps transactional in legal services, you can sort of think about providing surveillance-based legal services as an ongoing service. But this is a very different world in which there's perhaps more opportunity rather than the dominated world of the first one. The third one, again, contrasting with the first two, which is the point of these things, is this was a world in which there's a very different sets of values. So we think about going forward, rather than having the perhaps conventional values we have now about profit maximization and that sort of thing, it becomes a world in which there's a lots more contested values. So values around climate change, health, quality of life, and these sort of things come to the fore. Issues here include the fact that it might be much more difficult to get people to work for you as on the basis of a career. People no longer really want to have careers with single companies, so it becomes more difficult. It also is an opportunity space for smaller firms because the way in which you can express your values changes. But also, this is kind of interesting. I was thinking about a scenario workshop we did with a small firm based down in the southeast, and it was a very regional company, and their value was based on them being very regional. But if you think going forward, if we become less attached to places, then they have to express their values in different ways. So these are ways in which we try to provoke companies to think about how they would have to change. It's very difficult to do this in just a couple of moments. So I think what we did do was provoke the companies. We asked them to think about their current form, their current firm, and how they could utilize what they have to compete in these possible futures, what they have and how they could exploit this, but also the weaknesses they have. So if you think about SWOT analysis, the strength, opportunities, threats, and etc., right? But also thinking about the things that they would need in order to develop their position in these future worlds. And so I think we succeeded in provoking people. Some people found it scary, but perhaps especially the first scenario, which is a domination by big firms, really squeezed out, such that these mid-sized firms find it quite difficult to have a position. They have to buy data at huge expense. I also thought it was an interesting process for allowing people at different levels in the firm to communicate and share ideas. So rather than the big boss dominating the conversation, it's a way of finding people enabling people to express different ideas about what the future might be. And finally, just to comment on this, I mean, I think both the design sprints and these sort of scenarios work can be seen as a form of organizational insurance. So if we think about insurance, we take out insurance against risks of things that we don't we don't think will happen, but they might happen. So as a form of organizational insurance, we think that engaging in scenario discussions and also design sprints is a way to kind of contemplate the future, and therefore to think about how the organization might respond to possible futures, rather than sort of carry on as if everything will remain unchanged forever. That's my little slot done. So thank you very much, and I'll pass on to James and Martin, who will tell you about what they discovered was actually happening in the firms.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And I can confirm it's sunny in Lancaster as well. Bruce has set out the futures aspect of the project, and James and I will talk about very much the present and the recent past in discussing what we found at firms, both mid-tier and larger firms, have been doing in AI adoption. As Lucy said earlier, the sprints and the various activities in the design have been informed by a significant amount of empirical research in firms, and we worked, as the slide summarizes here, with quite a number of law firms and accounting firms to initially get a feel for, as it were, what's going on out there. And then we spent quite a lot of time with a smaller number to understand from different members of the firm's perspectives the experiences they've had of adopting AI-based technologies, those deep dives. And so there's a significant chunk of research that's underpinning what we have done in the other aspects of the project. So the idea is there, as suggested by the graphic, that this evidence informed in the sprints the particular focus that firms wanted to take in terms of their business model innovation, and how these particular examples that I'm going to talk about might apply, or at least inspire ideas for the particular firm engaged in the design activity. I'm going to talk a little bit about the cases that we identified, and then James will talk a bit about approaches to chain. So what I'm going to talk about briefly are some of the purposes to which we saw AI-based technologies being put from a business point of view. And they're kind of synthesized from the various firms we looked at. And so they're kind of archetypes, if you like, of what various firms did in particular practice areas, and indeed in some cases across the firm. Next click, please. On this side, we've got a number of examples, cases of uses that are focusing really on the processes of delivering service to clients and within the firm. So the efficient firm, as we called it, uses AI-based technology to execute tasks in serving clients. So taking particular areas of perhaps repetitive or higher volume activity and using appropriate tools to speed them up, automate them, and execute the tasks with consequences for tasks associated with it. But that focus in the efficient firm is about doing things quicker and to some extent taking over laborious, repetitive tasks with the technology. The automated firm focuses on using technology for internal administrative functions, HR, and perhaps time booking time used on serving particular clients. So it's in a sense supporting some of the chores within the firm, but also serve to get people familiar with the use of AI in their day-to-day work, and supported the application of technology then in client-facing activities. And the third area we saw, an implication perhaps of some of those technology uses, is that it changed the logic of insourcing and outsourcing. So tasks, routine tasks that had been outsourced or offshored, could be brought back inside the firm and reintegrated with the other client-facing activities, which offers many advantages in terms of, as it were, keeping all the work under one roof. So in contrast perhaps to those process focus, which are perhaps more about doing the same things in a way better, quicker, more inexpensively, AI also in many cases offered ways to extend the nature of the service offered to the client. And of course that's what in the end this is all about, is delivering service to clients. And we saw again some archetypes of this. One, the data analyzer, very much is a spin-off from process applications. That's using the data aggregated to see patterns and offer new insights to clients, perhaps presented in different ways, or indeed new insights that were not possible using more traditional approaches to analysing data. In some instances, the process of applying the technology requires the professional service firm to codify, document and map clients' processes in procurement or HR, and then thereby they become experts in the client's process and can offer spin-off additional consultancy advice to the client on perhaps how to improve their procurement activity or their HR and training activities. And a third archetype here is to change, in a sense, the boundaries of the firm, who does what. So rather than using software within the law firm or accounting firm to provide services to the client, the software can be embedded with the expertise of the law or accountancy firm and provided to the client to then serve themselves. So in a sense, the expertise of the professional service firm is baked in and then accessed by the client. And so there's a shift in the division of labour and the business model more fundamentally. So the suggestion there is that several of these service extension models actually result from process applications. And underpinning all this is the firm in different ways acting as a place where innovation happens, as well as simply, as it were, the delivery of service to clients. And we saw different models and different mixes of innovation approach, but I guess the basic approaches are more focused on in-house technology development, buying in technology and adapting it in-house to serve the customer. Proof of concept, more of a partnership with technology vendors, so working to develop softwares and adapt them and act as a test bed for up and coming new technologies in a more equal way. And perhaps in bigger firms acting as an incubator, so hosting startups and small technology developers to develop new technologies for particular tasks and thereby have preferential access to the technology as it's being developed. So last click, please, Zoe. So the idea there is that in some senses, many of these things are going on in any one flesh and blood firm. One thing leads to another, and the innovation activities need to happen somehow to support the applications in the process area and the service extension area. So these are some ways in which business processes can be supported by technology, and James now will talk about how we make that happen.
And so in the final step of our journey that I'm going to kind of take with us now, we've moved from the question of how we think about the future and how we might design the future, and we've thought about potential new innovations and the way that technology can be harnessed inside the firm. But as we move to the end of the journey, and a really important part of the project that we've been doing is to look at how to embed this within firms and to ensure that it's actually implemented effectively so that we reach the end of the journey rather than going halfway down the track and then turning around again. So when we talk about approaches, we're really focusing upon how firms go about actually implementing the solutions within the firm, and recognizing that beyond the question of the technology, actually making the changes that are required to successfully use new technologies and develop new business models requires us to move beyond a plug and play mentality. It requires us to think really carefully about the medium-term journey the firm will need to go on, and the questions of change that will need to happen that go way beyond technology and business process and extend out into the much wider question of the organization and the way it operates, and a number of different structures within the organization. So what this focus on approaches does in the final kind of step of our journey is asks firms to really reflect on the structure of the firm, the way they organize things, the people within the firm, and the processes that are used to manage those people. So it means focusing on questions such as the way people do their work and the roles and the skill sets that employees and partners and associates need to have. But it's more fundamental than that, because this then starts to lead through to questions such as how people are paid, how their work is valued. And of course, in many firms, that then automatically leads through to questions about partnership, the structure of partnership, who can become a partner, and the different kind of senior roles that we might need to see in firms. So, for example, with new technology, one of the fundamental questions that always arises is how you reward people with the skills to implement and use new technology if it isn't directly tied to fee earning and revenue that can be measured in perhaps more traditional ways. So the book of approaches and the kind of final step in our journey, after going through kind of reflection and thinking about the future and different business models and different technologies and solutions that might help move firms towards the future, is then really about reflecting more broadly on the overall architecture of the firm and how many of the processes and practices that have long been debated within professional service firms, how they come under the magnifying glass and are seen in a new light as a result of some of the changes that might happen, as a result of the reflections that the project has kind of helped people to develop in terms of futures, technology, and the next generation professional service firm. So next slide, please, Zoe. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Hilary, who's going to wrap the session up for us and lead us into the next part of the conference. So Hilary.
Thank you, James. Thank you to all of the speakers. I'm Hilary. I've been working on the industry engagement side within the university, part of the project, working closely with the Managing Partners Forum. My role is partly just to say, I hope that's been useful. The toolkit and all of the materials that are flowing from the project will be released shortly and available through HighQ and the Managing Partners platform. In the chat, if anybody would like to follow up on the various aspects, there are still ways to engage with the project if any particular areas have been of interest. But I'm also here just to do the Q&A, and we have got one question in just at the end. If any of the members of the panel would like to answer this one. I've heard it said that there is a difference between legal tech and law tech, one applying to process or internal improvements and the other applying to the client-facing external improvements. Is this a recognised distinction, and one arguably that we heard through research? Would any of the panel like to comment on that? James or Martin, perhaps, as you were closer to the firm side of the research? I don't know if you're going to come back.
Yeah, can we read? Yeah. So I can't see the question, so it's obviously in a special bit that I've not found yet in this complex environment. So I've now found it. Sorry. So yes, I mean I think we can start with that distinction because there are some elements that are about internal process and how things happen inside the firm and the kind of the back office engine that the client might not see. And then there are some things, for example, about how clients interact, how they are presented with analysis and potentially also, as we move towards the future, clients being presented with data. One of the things that we saw from our research was firms becoming, one of our cases is about data analyzers, where actually presenting the client with data about their business based on the work that's been done is valuable. So we can distinguish between kind of the inside and the outside. I guess where potentially some of the value and some of the most challenging but also potentially rewarding areas, of course, is where it bridges the two. And this is where it is perhaps more complex. So I think we would agree with that distinction, but also encourage people not to kind of forget about the grey zone in the middle. So the binaries help us kind of think it through, but the grey zone in the middle is also potentially an opportunity. And I can see Martin's appeared, so he may want to add something more.
Yeah, just that I think we've used the terminology, the practice of law and the business of law as a distinguishing between those two, rather than legal tech or law tech. I'm not so sure that I've formed in my mind a clear distinction between the meaning of those two terms. But certainly there are those two domains in which the principal applications exist.
Well, I think it's fair to say that they're not consistently used by the research interviewees. So we've heard both terms used and used interchangeably, but there is that school of thought out there that we found. And as Martin said, it was easier to think of it in those two domains. Look, I'm conscious of time. I'm here to ensure that we finish on time. I trust that's been useful. I have just put my details in the chat, and thank you to the Managing Partners Forum for inviting us.